This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome to the Marvel Age Masterclass podcast with host Ben Morse. Episode 2, 1963, with guest Tim Capel.
Hello, true believers, and welcome back to Marvel Age Masterclass, the podcast where we pick apart the podcast that's picking apart the history of Marvel Comics. My name is Ben Morse. I am the former editorial director of digital media over at Marvel Entertainment. I am the current visiting professor of new media at UNLV. I am coming at you taped from my backyard in the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. This is episode 2 of Marvel Age Masterclass. We are covering 1963. And if you haven't already listened to episode 2 of Marvel Age here on Place to Be Nation, I recommend you go over and do that right now. It's a tidy little 3.5 hour listen. It will get you through your day, no problem. But I can't do this alone. Last episode, I had Russell Sellers with me. He did a great job. And we're switching things up tonight. I've got with me, very excited about this, an X-Men fan extraordinaire, as well as perhaps the greatest proponent of Marvel Studios' Avengers Infinity War anywhere. That is Timarius Tim Capel. Tim, welcome to the Masterclass.
I suppose I set myself up for that, didn't I?
You're literally... you're the only person I know who didn't like it. So I think no, that gives me that. Who
didn't like it.
What's that?
I might be the only person I know who didn't like it.
Here's the thing, though. I have a fierce respect for you. I think you're very brave to have this opinion. I think I listened to your Not a Pod Blast review of Infinity War here
right.
elsewhere on Place to Be Nation. And I thought you made good points. I thought you were very valid. I loved the movie. I thought it was great, but I've definitely, I haven't been as big a fan of some of the other Marvel movies that people love. So I definitely know where you're coming from. And it's hard to be like that. I'll give you, I don't know if I talked about this on the first one, but the biggest thing for me is that I'm not a huge fan of the Star Wars movies. And I know what it's like to be on the other end of a popular fan sentiment. So much respect, and glad to have you on.
Well, thank you for that. I am so jazzed to be here. And who knew, who could believe that just starting this new podcasting venture, this Marvel Age initiative, if you want to call it that we've got the former editorial director of digital media for Marvel Entertainment. So that's really exciting to me. Been a big passion project of mine already. And you mentioned our last episode being a crisp 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I wonder, already looking ahead, we know that there are some years that there's just way too much to tackle in a single podcast. Sure. And I'm sort of we're all kind of wondering when that's going to happen, and I'm kind of are we there already? Maybe. So
it comes down the pike quicker than you would think, because the craziness is that, and I think let's get right into it, talking about 1963, is that the Marvel universe expands very quickly.
Yeah.
1961, 1962, I think you have the core elements, which were, of course, Fantastic Four as your baseline book, Spider-Man as your breakout solo hero, Hulk is part of the picture, not immediately successful, but he's there. And then, little things like Thor popping up and Ant-Man making his debut. By 63, everything's a runaway success. Fantastic Four is really cooking. It's going on all cylinders. They're creating... The thing that is really incredible to me was you have to think about the output of Lee and Kirby just for Fantastic Four. If you look at it in a modern context, the amount of concepts and characters they were creating on a monthly or bi-monthly basis is pretty phenomenal. You run down those first few issues of Fantastic Four, and we'll get into some of the recurring characters, but there's new elements in every issue. You know, there's something new going on in every issue. And then on the other side, on Spider-Man, you got Lee and Ditko cranking out new supporting characters, new villains, new things, new elements of Peter Parker's life. Those two books were just incredible repositories of creativity. And that's to say nothing of what Lee and Kirby were doing over on Journey into Mystery, and then some of the other characters we'll get into tonight. But I think, like you said, the Marvel Universe is fully realized probably a little quicker than people would think.
Yeah.
You would think it probably takes like a couple years to get on its feet, but no. By 1963, it's pretty well populated.
It feels like there's already years and years worth of story that they've laid out just within a little under 2 years that we have covered thus far on the podcast. And like you said, Fantastic Four alone is just incredible. And I've been so impressed by even those, anthology books. We took a look at Amazing Adult Fantasy as sort of the first example of what comics were like before the modern superhero game was kind of reinvented with Marvel. And even those where it's 5 short stories a pop, all done by Lee and Ditko or Lee and Kirby or Lee and somebody. And I'm just so impressed that, month after month to do that kind of thing and to have that kind of, creative output, let alone just the labor involved in that. So, it's just mind-blowing to me.
It's the type of thing where you have to be almost a little forgiving of an Incredible Hulk or of an Ant-Man or of, as we'll get into tonight briefly, Sergeant Fury, which is not everyone's cup of tea. It's like just the sheer amount of stuff they were throwing at the wall. Obviously, a lot of it was going to miss. And there's a lot of villains, supporting characters in those first couple years of Fantastic Four that do, they don't make the mark. I'm thinking back to, and you might have to help me out because you've read this stuff more recently than I have, but there were villains like I believe there was a villain called Miracle Man. I don't know if you guys read the issue covering him, but there's a villain called Miracle Man who certainly never seen again, and there's a few misses there. I'll say that Lee and Ditko's track record on Amazing Spider-Man probably a little more impressive, because if you think about it, just the lineup of villains, Sandman, Vulture, Mysterio, Doc Ock, Kraven the Hunter, my personal favorite, and these guys are all in the first year, and it's all one after the other. Probably like the closest that Lee and Ditko came to misses on Amazing Spider-Man is something like the Chameleon, who's never broken out huge, or the Tinkerer, who's always been kind of, a secondary villain. But even them, they're still around, and they're still, getting stories. So I think, you tend to be a little more forgiving of the failures when you just look at the sheer amount of successes that these guys are racking up.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Spider-Man was the absolute standout for me, especially in this run. We got a taste of him in 62 in our first episode, but we really got a good feel for what Spider-Man comics were going to be like in 1963 with, it's just 3 issues we looked at in our, reading list for episode 2, but there's so much crammed in there. You've got 2 stories per issue for numbers 1 and 2, and then the full length with Dr. Octopus debuting in number 3. So just a lot to unpack there. You mentioned even the weak links like the Tinkerer, they're still mainstays, so their hit rate is astounding. There's just not really a dud. Maybe if you can call it that, Moose, who I think I described as the proto-Flash, but even that could have just been like an editorial call. I kind of kid with that whole deal, but
even Moose, I think, go ahead.
There's just not as much feeling out, it seems like, on that series as others before they found their footing.
Even Moose, maybe a spiritual predecessor to Kong, Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah,
Definitely a connection there. But the other thing, and before we get into kind of some specific topics, the last thing I want to touch on is it's crazy also that if you consider comics today and comics as they've been for the last, 20, 30 years, the idea of you have a new character and you launch them in their own book is remarkable. That's not something that happens a lot. I mean, I think back to, the standard thing you would do, like dating back to the 70s or 80s, right on into the 90s and today, is you introduce a character in the pages of one of your hit books. You see if they gain traction. You spin them out into their own limited series. The limited series works. I guess they don't really do that anymore. But I'm thinking, this is like my '90s brain. You spin them out into a limited series, and then you see if it works. I'm just even thinking about, like, I remember while I was at Marvel, we launched a book called Mosaic, which was an Inhuman character. He was a basketball player. It was a cool concept, and it was and I was just like, I remember being bowled over by the fact that this is a completely new character debuting in his own #1. I think he made like a cameo in Inhuman's book, but this was a completely new character. We can argue the success or failure of Mosaic another day, but it was such a rarity. I think of something like Runaways that was launched with no connection to anything else.
Wow.
Those are rare. Those books that you launch with no connection to anything and they have traction. But we are going to look at 1963, and it's just like, it wasn't like, oh, here's this group of teen heroes, the X-Men, who look up to the Fantastic Four, introduced in the pages of Fantastic Four, get their own book. It's right from the start. You just get the X-Men in their own book, with their own villains, with their own base. They have all their own stuff, and it's sink or swim for all of these. And I guess that's why, you have an Incredible Hulk that only lasts 6 issues. The X-Men had, in future episodes, we'll get into the X-Men more. I want to talk a lot about X-Men with you tonight.
Okay.
But we will, delve into the fact that they weren't best. But I just think even like, just Iron Man, Thor, the Avengers, Doctor Strange, all these concepts just thrown out there, and it's just a matter of, they didn't guest star in Fantastic Four until they were already established, which would be kind of fun, and that's something that would happen later.
Right. And it is interesting to me the characters that debut in their own series kind of right out of the gate, and others that sort of hang around in the anthology books for a while.
Right.
And maybe you can answer this. Do you think that's just Stan Lee maybe hedging his bets a little bit at the time, or just maybe some limitations of, their circulation output at the time? I know their distribution arrangement was pretty unfavorable for a while.
Right. Well, of course, the company that owned DC owned them after a fashion. That's kind of known as that Marvel cut a deal with the. I don't know all the logistics. I think you guys talked about it a little on your show, but basically, DC kept them under their thumb by saying you could only publish X amount of titles a month or every 2 months. So, I think the position Stan and Martin Goodman were in was, you have these books like Tales of Suspense, Journey into Mystery, Tales to Astonish, that are selling pretty well.
Yeah.
They have a certain pedigree to them. So the idea that you just replace them all with unproven titles is not really good business.
It's risky.
The idea, and you see it again. I hate to keep going back to it, but you see it with Hulk. They launched Hulk in his own book, and he tanked and went down in 6 issues, and that's 6 issues of a failed book that Marvel has to basically eat. Whereas then you have, I think Spider-Man's unique, but even Spider-Man, it's like you debuted him in Amazing Fantasy, but I think with Spider-Man, it was evident, and Russell and I talked about this a lot on the first episode, that it was evident from the start that Spider-Man was special, and he was going to, do something really amazing, pun intended. So they launched him into his own book right away. But some of these characters, like Thor, like Iron Man, Ant-Man to a lesser degree, you see them, try them out in the anthology books, let them headline the anthology books, and then see where it goes. There's no rush to get them into their own title, because if Tales of Suspense is selling better with Iron Man as the star, then great, that's good for Marvel. They don't need an Iron Man title right away. A lot of the things we think about today, just in terms of like branding and the idea that the book will sell better if the title character is right there, that wasn't as big a deal back in the 60s. The idea was just, we have these successful books, let's plug some characters into them and let's see if they work.
I think that kind of, behind the scenes background context is always so interesting to me. And
yeah, for sure.
Answering those questions of that any reader coming at this stuff would logically have. Why was Thor in a title called Journey into Mystery? Just
right.
That kind of thing. I think is valuable to get some understanding of. Well, a lot of these series were already pretty solid sales wise, and just became more so once you plugged these bigger superhero creations into that formula.
And I think if Stan had his way, you probably... I mean, look, he was creating a universe. Him, Jack, Steve, Don Heck, Larry Lieber, the other guys who start popping up, helping out with these. But it's like, I think if Stan had his way, it would have been Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, Doctor Strange. They would have all had their own books. They would have been titled by their books. Yeah. But I think if I had to guess, and a Marvel historian would know better than me, but I would guess that Martin Goodman was, and again, this is something Russell and I discussed, I think he was loosing the leash bit by bit, giving him a little more rope bit by bit. I think the Fantastic Four bought Stan a lot of success and bought him a lot of freedom. And I think it's not a coincidence that because Fantastic Four was the runaway hit, the 2 or 3 rather books you saw launched, not in anthologies, but in their own titles, were team books. I think he proved something with Fantastic Four. So basically going back to the well with Avengers, with X-Men, with Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, Stan could say to Martin Goodman, well, Fantastic Four was a hit, so I think this is going to be a hit too. I think Spider-Man was a hit, but not big enough to prove that they could just launch heroes in their own titles. And I think, again, you also had working against you the fact that Hulk failed. We can't underscore the failure of Hulk and what that meant to the burgeoning Marvel universe. I think if you look at it, those are the 3 most important books right there are Fantastic Four, Amazing Spider-Man, and Incredible Hulk. And the fact that they went 2 for 3 is great, but I think the fact that one of their solo titles didn't hit definitely impacted what would happen in the next few years. The incredible thing, and it's so hard doing a Marvel podcast, Tim, because any adjective you use is going to be a fucking pun. But the incredible thing to me is that while Hulk may have made Martin Goodman more timid to launch Iron Man and Thor in their own titles, it didn't hinder Stan, Jack, and Steve. They were going to keep on creating. They were going to keep on debuting new things. They didn't care that Hulk failed, I don't think. Right. They were like, and even, you know what? The ballsy thing, and we'll talk about this later in the episode, is the fact that Hulk, commercial failure, they didn't give up on it. They kept putting him in all their other books. And I would argue, and this is a point I want you to simmer on, and we'll come back to it later, Hulk as guest star probably saved the character, because he proved a much more that and eventually the TV show would save the character. I think just the success of Hulk as almost antagonist to, whether it's to the Thing, whether it's the Avengers, but Hulk showing up that way gave the character new life.
Yeah, I mean, the very month his book was canceled, which I do think that is something that gets a little bit lost to history, the fact that the Incredible Hulk ran for 6 issues and flopped. People don't really either know that or remember that if they do. So I think that is something that's sort of important to preserve. But definitely. Yeah, I mean, that month that they sort of pull the plug on him, he pops up in Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and it's honestly, that is one of my favorite early Fantastic Four stories.
Yeah,
is Thing versus Hulk. Yeah. All right, let's put a pin in that. I want to come back to it. That's one of the topics I want to discuss. While we're on the topic of Fantastic Four, obviously we're going to get into some of the new characters and the new launches in a little bit. But one thing I wanted to talk about was Fantastic Four, obviously still the big influential flagship title. And the thing that I think is most important for the Fantastic Four in 1963, and you can agree or disagree with me on this one, is that they got the guy I basically consider their fifth member, and that's Doctor Doom. I think that Doctor Doom is as much a piece of the Fantastic Four puzzle as any of the Fantastic Four. I think they needed that counterbalance, that recurring villain. And of course we had Namor as well. And we'll talk about Namor. But Namor was always destined to do other things. He was always destined to waver and go back to the side of good and all this other stuff. I think Doctor Doom as this quintessential villain this is the important thing about Doctor Doom. This is what I think really made him work. And you guys talked on the episode about how he's not quite full bore Doom in those first few appearances.
Right.
But he quickly gets there. To me, the most important element of Doctor Doom, and there's a lot of important elements, the political stuff, the tragedy of his origin, his relationship with his mother, so many great things in Doctor Doom. I think he's had amazing stories throughout the years. Like I don't know how much of this you've read, but like the Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange Torment and Triumph is incredible.
Yeah. It's been many years, but wow, yeah.
Yeah, and then like the really underrated Ed Brubaker Books of Doom was a fantastic limited series where he really delved into that. But getting back, the most important thing to me about Doctor Doom is that he's intimately tied to the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four, at their core, are a family of superheroes, a family of adventurers. And Doctor Doom is, even though he's not related by blood, but neither is Ben Grimm, he's a member of the family. He's the outcast uncle who has this tie to him. The fact that his central tragedy, his fatal flaw, comes when he is a college student with Reed Richards and Ben Grimm, I think sets him apart. I think comics before this, when they were introducing villains, and again, I'm not trying to bash on DC, but if you look back at kind of like the DC characters like Superman and Lex Luthor, I think they tried to retroactively, all those stories that like retroactively in the Silver Age inserted Lex Luthor, said he grew up in Smallville, or even the show Smallville, and it never worked. It always felt like very forced. On the Marvel side, I'll say Captain America and the Red Skull, opposite numbers, but it's not like they had a personal connection. I think the fact that Doom's rivalry with the Fantastic Four felt very personal. And to me, that is the quintessential thing that makes him work as a villain.
I've never thought of it in those terms, but hearing that, it does make a lot of sense and click with me just because of the personal history and the way that his origin is so intrinsically linked with theirs. Even though, like you said, he's not on the space shuttle. He doesn't get bombarded with cosmic rays himself. But
and there have been stories that have tried to put him there, and I think they all failed. Yeah,
hell,
there were like incarnations.
The first movie did.
The movie. The first movie put him there, and I think that was a mistake. He doesn't belong. He doesn't need to be in the origin to be tied to the FF.
Yeah, doing that, it just doesn't really add anything. Well, it takes away from the great material that is already kind of his, that isn't linked in with the FF, because he kind of goes on his own almost perverse version of a hero's journey and comes out the other end kind of worse for it. I mean, there's a tragedy to that character. You think about if he could let go of his resentment and his vanity and his obsessions and just his utter hatred for Reed Richards and the extended Richards family. Just imagine if they were to work together, what they could accomplish. They could make each other better. Reed Richards is a very flawed type of character.
Absolutely.
to say the least.
Yeah.
Doom as well, of course, but they could kind of complement each other in a way that they could accomplish great things. And just the fact that they're always at odds, it's like the world is just so much the worse for it. So yeah, that's very interesting to me.
I talked last episode about how I don't think Reed Richards is an intrinsically cool character, but I noticed
hot take. Whoa.
Yeah, right. But I think that a lot. If you look over the years, so many Fantastic Four and Marvel writers have found they've mined so much ground with Reed Richards because he is a complex character, even if he's not, maybe not everyone's instant favorite. Here's another hot take. I will argue that perhaps the coolest thing about Reed Richards is how much Dr. Doom hates him. I think that might be his most appealing quality. Just the fact that whenever Doom shows up, because Doom is just such an evil bastard, and he's just so, even though he has his sympathetic moments, and you try to get into him, just the minute that Reed shows up, and Doom just reverts to this cackling villain. I would say as complex as Doom gets, because they've told many great Doom stories over the years where he has these layers to him. He's protecting Latveria. He's looking out for his people. He's trying to make the world a better place. The minute Reed Richards shows up, it's like, and this is what makes him so personal. He reverts to the college student who's jealous of Reed Richards. He gets immature instantly. The greatest example I can think of, and one of the coolest things for me when I was at Marvel, was, of course, Jonathan Hickman spent years, literally years, building up from his days on Fantastic Four to his days on Avengers. He finally built up to Secret Wars, which I can say now was basically, Secret Wars was in the works for years. Okay. Like, we knew it was coming. And we were so excited because nobody did big stories quite like Jonathan Hickman. His ideas are just so huge and so outsized. And the coolest thing for me about Secret Wars was it's this huge story, universe is dying, all the Avengers, every character from every Marvel alternate reality, all this stuff happening. The moment that I realized that Secret Wars is a story about Dr. Doom and Reed Richards, it became so much cooler. Because look at that story. And I know we're not talking about 1963 right now. No. Obviously, but
it's a logical extension of his character from these early outset appearances.
And I'm saying, look at Secret Wars. Doom literally saves all of reality and creates this world where he is a benevolent ruler. Things are okay. People are happy. There's flaws, but things are going all right. He's got a family. Weirdly, creepily, it's the Fantastic Four, but
sure.
You realize, and then that moment when you realize that in all these alternate realities, there's no Mr. Fantastics, and you realize that Doom has created this whole world that is perfect, and for him, the most perfect thing is that Reed Richards does not exist. And then Reed Richards steps out of that spaceship, and Doom loses it. He's ultimate cool. He is the ruler of all reality. He has no equals, no peers. He can dismiss people with a thought. And then when Reed fucking Richards shows up, he just immediately deconstructs back into Dr. Doom, the villain who needs to show that he is better and smarter than Reed Richards. And to tie it back to 63, I think we see, especially in that story where they switch bodies, this is what drives Doom. It's a hatred of Reed Richards and gradually a hatred of his family. And it's such a personal connection. You look at the greatest villains in comics. I think the more personal the Joker's connection to Batman became, the better villain he became.
Yes.
Magneto, who we'll discuss later, the more you learned about his history with Xavier, the more rich he became, and of course all his ties with various X-Men. And I think Doom is really, again, like Fantastic Four, is the start of the modern team book. In many ways, Dr. Doom is the start of the modern villain.
And that's the kind of thing that I absolutely love. And it's so much that what I think of anyway is that signature Marvel style of you have believable, relatable character motivations, but played out on this grandiose stage in a lot of cases. You don't get much bigger than creating and destroying realities.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, it all comes down to your grudge against this one person.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The whole thing falls apart under just the weight of that. I mean, it's so human and yet so far-reaching and cosmic and enormous at the same time, and that's the kind of thing that I live for. You look at Thanos in Death; he's trying to impress a girl, basically. Right. To give a somewhat contemporary example. Yeah. So that's just, I eat that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Doctor Doom is one of the greatest villains of all time, but I think he's one of the greatest villains because you can have him fight the Avengers. You can have him fight Spider-Man. There's that classic, I think Cochran was still on the book when he fought the X-Men, and he captures Storm and all that good stuff he's working with Arcade. Great story. Yeah. But at the end of the day, Doom's a Fantastic Four villain. There's no question. Nothing is as personal to him as his feud with Reed Richards, and subsequently his feud with the Richards, Grimm, Storm family. Mm-hmm.
Gosh, so I'm just reminded of, there was a Mark Waid Fantastic Four. It was, I believe, 2 separate arcs in 2003 or 2004. Yep. That, God, I need to reread those. Again, we're getting a little bit off, but
we'll get back to this.
Dr.
No,
Doom's,
you need to talk about it.
No, I mean, it's just, I loved them at the time so much. Yeah. As that run was I was a little bit hot and cold on it at first, because he sort of hit the reset button on some of the characterizations.
Yep.
But that was just so he could kind of build them up and take them in the direction he wanted to go. So it was sort of a necessary evil, I guess.
Yeah.
And then it just hit, this 1-2 punch of the Doom story. And one of them was called Unthinkable.
Yeah, it was called Unthinkable. It was phenomenal.
And I don't even really want to get into the details, because I feel like there are people who haven't read it and should read it, because it's probably
a quintessential Doctor Doom story.
It is, and it's probably really underlooked these days.
Yeah.
Just because it was a while ago, and I don't know, there was a lot from that period that just sort of gets lost to time unfairly, I think. But
it's also Mike Wieringo art, which I think made it shine, because this is the same way. It's interesting. I remember when we were when I was at Wizard, we were covering 52, and I said, and they had Todd Knock, who's a good friend of mine and one of my favorite artists. He drew the Ralph Dibny stuff, which was basically a horror story, and people were like, "Why is Todd Knock, who has this cartoony style, drawing a horror story?" And I was like, because it makes it all the more terrifying. When you have this cartoony version of, I won't get into the stuff from 52, but it's the same with Wieringo. Wieringo was kind of known for having this, very clean superhero style. And I think when he drew Doom, and specifically Doom doing these terrible things to the Fantastic Four, it felt worse. I'll give you another example. It's the fact that on Alias, Bendis got Mark Waid to draw the Jessica Jones Purple Man sequences, and because he's such a classic superhero artist, it made it 10 times as disturbing. The stuff that Michael Gaydos was drawing was disturbing, but the Bagley stuff, it was oh no, this is supposed to be clean fun. This guy is, Mr. Ultimate Spider-Man, and he's drawing these really perverse ideas. It's the same with Wieringo on Doom. But yeah, I mean, we could sit here all night doing a podcast on Doctor Doom. We might have to do a podcast on Doctor Doom. I owe Russell a few podcasts. Well, we'll keep track, and I'll owe you a few podcasts by the end of this too. But I want to move on. I want to talk. We're talking pillars of the Marvel Universe, and of course, you can't go much further without talking about what Spider-Man was up to. We touched on it a little bit, but Spider-Man was really getting this world created around him. That's what the issues you guys read of Amazing Spider-Man the origin was like the origin was fundamental. It was an incredible origin. It established that this was going to be a great character right out the gate. He was different. He was flawed. Had all this good stuff going on. But what really strikes me in the first few issues of Amazing Spider-Man is this world they create around him. You get the high school characters. You get the Daily Bugle characters. You get the villains. And of course, the thing about Spider-Man villains that was always so interesting, I think, again, this is a genius Stan Lee move, and credit to Ditko as well, because I don't think you can credit one without crediting the other. But the thing with previous teen heroes, as we established on episode 1 of Marvel Masterclass, Stan Lee hated teen superheroes. Yes. And with Spider-Man, he wanted to create a teen superhero who was everything that Bucky and Robin were not. But with teen superheroes, you often had them going up against just, generic villains whose motivation was taking over the world or whatever was going on like that. The thing that Stan did that was brilliant, when you look at the Vulture, when you look at Dr. Octopus, when you look at a lot of those early classic Spider-Man villains, is they're all old men. The Tinkerer. Yes. They're all old men. And you see them as just like, it adds another layer, because Spider-Man is this vital young kid. He's this high schooler, and he's being tormented by these like septuagenarians, and it's incredible. Right. And it's just like, it was so cool. I mean, the Sandman is you get like Sandman and Kraven and Chameleon are arguably middle-aged, but you really have this feel that it's almost like Spidey is still a high school student, and he's basically fighting super evil versions of his teachers. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was just such a brilliant twist. It's such a small thing, but it's so brilliant. And even J. Jonah Jameson. It's just the idea that if I'm reading the Spider-Man comic, I maybe I'm young, maybe I'm a kid, and I have this idea that people older than me are evil and are against me. And like the older generation is trying to hold me down. And Stan and Steve tapped into that the same way, they brilliantly made the Fantastic Four a family that bickered, and you could instantly relate to them because you bicker with your family. You were on Spider-Man's side because he's fighting this older generation that just doesn't understand. And I thought that was just great.
Yeah, that's something that goes a little bit unremarked upon, probably. You don't realize, unless you're really reading these first few issues of ASM sequentially, it doesn't hit you that these are just senior citizens as his initial rogues gallery. And you're right. I mean, when you're a kid, when you're a kid without really a care in the world, who are your only natural antagonists, if you can even call it that? It's going to be your elders in some capacity, people who are making your life difficult as a child. Exactly.
They're obstacles to you.
Yeah, that is something you can kind of hone in on and makes the character all the more relatable. And I'm thinking of them also as characters that, if there's anything similar to Peter Parker or that you can kind of draw a line from, they had the one bad day just like he had the one bad day, but because their lives have played out remarkably differently, it has warped them in such a way that it really hasn't for Peter Parker. He was young enough, still impressionable enough, still good-natured enough, had the right values and positive influences in his life that he doesn't go in this villainous direction. And that is sort of a question that hangs over these early issues too, that Russell talked about a lot in our second episode, this kind of will he or won't he in terms of crossing that kind of moral event horizon. And could be, I think, arguably justified in doing so in some cases.
I think it's a really, really astute point to point out that basically you're right. These are all characters who are, in some sense, the dark mirror of Spider-Man. Not only in the sense that they had the one bad day and decided to go the evil route, but I think also if you look at science as being so fundamental to the character of Peter Parker, his love of science. Look at Doc Ock. Look at Adrian Toomes, the Vulture. Look at all these characters. They all are brilliant. Look at the Lizard. They're all scientists who basically pervert science for evil means. And Peter Parker, once you get past the radioactive spider bite and the powers and all that, his web shooters, his spider tracers, all the stuff he comes up with is using science for good. But in these villains, you have the reflection of, what if they had the one bad day? What if they used their genius for evil? And they really are. They're just this twisted, evil reflection of Peter Parker. And the same way we talked about Doom being such a great villain because of that personal connection, you really feel like some of these villains are, I don't think any of them, I don't know, you can argue if any of them are on the level of Doctor Doom, but certainly these are villains with staying power, and they're classic villains who have all, kind of persevered and made it to this day. And I think a lot of that comes back to the fact that you can tie them directly to Spider-Man. And I'll even say that maybe the greatest, not villain, but antagonist introduced in this run is J. Jonah Jameson.
Oh my God, yeah.
Who's just so over the top. I mean, and I think, man, if there was a character that Stan Lee lived in, it would probably have to be J. Jonah Jameson, just the way he talks and the way he presents himself, and he's a newsman and all this other stuff. But I think look at the modern day. I already name dropped Runaways once, but I'll say Runaways was brilliant because it took the concept of every kid thinks their parents are evil at some point in their lives, and it turned it into a real thing. Yes. Spider-Man was doing that decades earlier with the idea that all kids think that adults, particularly old people, are evil, and here it is. We're going to show you, yes, they are. Yes, you're right, and we're going to have Peter Parker fight them every month.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, after the death of Uncle Ben, which is sort of his, his coming of age moment, he, in a way, is more of the parent to Aunt May. I mean, which sounds so kind of absurd, but
it makes a lot of sense.
It's not like she's raising him at that point. He's kind of trying to be the breadwinner and looking out for her. And I mean, that's a lot to put on a then high school senior. He's supposed to be 17, maybe 18 years old, probably not even that old. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of like you have to have these antagonists who, again, are figures, authority figures, who can't really command the respect that you would look for at that age because of the way they're conducting themselves. So there is kind of almost a lesson in that. I don't know. Stan could go in a lot of different directions with some of these, some of the life lessons that he was sort of imparting in these comics. Just knowing the age of his readership, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I think that was it was a masterstroke on Stan's part. Of course, the Ditko art continued to be phenomenal. We're going to talk more about Ditko art in a second. But I do want to circle back to a topic we touched on and gave a little time to. I mean, we talked about it a lot in the intro, was the idea that the Hulk's solo series failed. It tanked. And by all means, the comics history is littered with characters who didn't work and who then became forgotten. But Stan and Jack thought highly enough of the Hulk that they made him, like you said, the month his book is canceled, they don't just say, well, I guess we gave it a try. They put him in Fantastic Four. He's instantly more interesting as an antagonist than a protagonist. And I would say that years of Hulk stories have borne out that theory, that idea that Hulk is a menace might be, and Hulk is a menace who we, the readers, ultimately know is a good soul, but who the characters all hate. That's probably Hulk at his best. I mean, the best Hulk stories are the ones where he is an outcast in the Marvel Universe. And that's all due respect to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where I think they've figured out a way to make the Hulk work as a hero and a member of the Avengers. Mm-hmm. But in comics, I think the Hulk is always better as the antagonist. And you look at the first issue of Avengers, Hulk's the antagonist there for most of the book. They fight the Hulk. He eventually becomes a member of the team, but as you guys will cover in 1964, that doesn't last for very long.
Right, not for very long. It's kind of same story in issue 2, and then he's I think these came out, well, I don't know if 3 came out in 63 or not, but anyway, he's gone by issue 3, so right. It's sort of like they knew that. I think the Hulk was kind of better in limited doses, and as you said, as a foil to these more kind of traditional goody-good type superheroes.
Yeah. I think they figured out they had a good thing. I mean, the Hulk really worked on kind of, and it's interesting, in Avengers he teamed up with Namor a lot, because I think he worked in a lot of the same ways Namor did, in that he was clearly a charismatic character. He was more than just the villain of the month. He wasn't Mole Man or Puppet Master or any of them, but he was like, just the idea of him as this misunderstood, his dynamic with the Thing, I always thought was great, because the Thing is the underdog. Yeah. He's the one we're rooting for. To tie it back to my roots, he was like, the Thing is, this is going to sound like blasphemy given the Thing's origins, but he was the Boston Red Sox to the Hulk's New York Yankees for many years.
I'm sure that statement will make certain individuals very upset, but
yeah, that's going to upset a lot of people, especially those on Yancey Street. But yeah, I mean, the idea of the Thing is the underdog, the idea of the Hulk as this antagonist. But I just think, again, more credit to the early fathers of the Marvel Universe, that Hulk didn't work as a leading man, and it would have been easy to toss him on the scrap heap. But instead, they figured out a way to make him work, where I think the Hulk became a selling point. I think if Hulk was going to be in your book that month, if he was fighting Spider-Man, if he was fighting Thor, that spiked sales. And I think that's Stan and Jack's kind of FU to the book getting canceled is, well, we're going to take this guy and make him a huge star so that he moves the needle when we put him in other books.
That's very true. And I almost wonder if, I'm not going to say Hulk was ahead of his time, but just maybe was published a little too early. Like if he had been one of those 63 debuts rather than 62. I mean, we're talking a difference of all 12 months, but This seems to count for a lot in terms of Marvel's early momentum. Just the groundswell of support that they had built just in that very short span of time, and the goodwill within their readership. Maybe people would have really rallied behind a Hulk solo series if they had held off and debuted that a little bit later. I mean, certainly he'll get another shot in short order, but it's just sort of, it's kind of like they just barely missed the mark with him, I think. Not that the series was any great shakes, as we talked about, but I mean, it's just, you wonder how it might have been pitched and received a little bit differently if it had been only a few months down the line. And
I'll play devil's advocate to you, Tim, and I don't think Hulk would have been any more successful in 63 debuting as a solo, because much like, to draw a wrestling analogy, some characters, like say Rocky Maivia, need that heel run before the fans embrace them and turn them face. I think that's what Hulk needed. I think Hulk needed to be everyone's favorite villain, so that eventually the fans could say, you know what, we feel sorry for this guy. We want to see stories where he is the hero. So I don't think launching the Hulk a year, 2 years later necessarily makes him a success. I think putting him in Fantastic Four and Avengers as an antagonist, I think that's what ultimately makes him a success, because the fans love him enough that they demand more Hulk. It's look at Roman Reigns today. It's like if they would just Roman Reigns to me essentially is the first 6 issues of Hulk, and if they would just let him, be the bad guy, eventually people are going to clamor for more of him. That's what I think happened with the Hulk. I think the Hulk needed his heel run in order to become a bigger babyface.
There is a lot to be said for that, and I think if Fantastic Four letters pages are any indication from around this time period, if that's representative of the wider readership, it seems like people were really clamoring for, hey, when's the Hulk going to fight the Thing? That's what they wanted to see. People were not interested in these Cold War politics and all this bullshit that kind of came in with that first Hulk issue. I mean, it's just there's so much going on, and it's so at odds with everything, with itself, with what people probably cared about. It was just a misfire, and
right.
It was like there's a character here with some appeal, and we just need to tap into that, give people what they're actually interested in when it comes to this character, which is putting him in opposition to our other actual hits, and we might have something.
I think so. I think that's what was needed. Speaking of a character that did hit, I would call this character a modest success, though, which is ironic considering his role in the modern day. But let's talk about Iron Man for a sec, who debuted in Tales of Suspense. Tony Stark, super racist origin. But, interesting character. To me, I think Iron Man gets undersold, and Tony Stark gets undersold. When people are talking about, the Fantastic Four were revolutionary, Spider-Man was so innovative, I don't think people talk enough about Iron Man, in the sense that there weren't a lot, like, if you talk about Peter Parker being the most relatable character in comics at the time, everyone could relate to him. He was a teenager, he was picked on, all this stuff. Tony Stark is a friggin' millionaire, fat cat weapons manufacturer. Mm-hmm. Like, even Bruce Wayne, who was a millionaire, had, the sympathetic qualities of his parents were killed.
Well, his parents were murdered in front of him.
Yeah, his parents were murdered, and, some other stuff going for him. And he was generally, like, when they looked at Bruce Wayne millionaire, he made his millions doing, like, good charitable stuff. You've got Tony Stark, who is really about as far from a comic book reader as you can get. He's this suave, debonair millionaire who makes his money by selling weapons to warlords. Mm-hmm. And, he's not sympathetic in the least. Yet
he gets himself blown up in the course of doing that. So
yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like, there's that semi-cautionary tale element to it, where how can I feel bad for this guy when he was such a shithead?
Yeah, exactly. And I would argue that years of Iron Man stories did very little to make Tony Stark any more sympathetic. And to me, Iron Man was always kind of a mystery to me. I did not get why this character was successful. I got why it was successful. What was successful is that he's got a cool costume. Right. That initial costume is needs a little work, but Don Heck did a decent job. But eventually, he's got this cool costume. He's the bleeding edge of technology, which makes him cool. But as far as it was almost like Stan. And I know Stan. I think the credited creators, and correct me if I'm wrong here, credited creators on Iron Man were Stan, Larry Lieber, and Don Heck. Correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think what they were doing with Iron Man, it was almost pushing the boundaries of what they had done so far. It's if you want to argue that Hulk was a reach in terms of them seeing what they could do, could they do this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde comic? I think Iron Man was even more of a reach in the idea that they're like, all right, well, the Fantastic Four are flawed heroes in the sense that they are, this family that squabbles, they're bickers, they're not the Justice League. Spider-Man is a flawed hero. A selfish act is at the crux of his origin. His uncle dies because he makes the wrong choice. Tony Stark is really the next level of, he's a flawed hero. He's arrogant. He's selfish. And we'll get to another character who's like this in a second. But it was really something about him. You know, he had those feet of clay. He was a normal person. And I would argue that all of this combined, we're going to jump ahead a few decades, but made Iron Man the central pillar of the Marvel Cinematic Universe for a couple reasons. Number one, because he was cool as shit, and he had this awesome armor and this great technology to do stuff, but also you had Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, the success of Iron Man in 2008 is in large part because Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark. Like, he's not really... Yeah. It's not a big reach for him to play Tony Stark. He's playing... You know, he's playing himself. And I don't know. I'm unpacking a lot. Go ahead.
I think the departure there with the movie is, I mean, yes, RDJ is an enormous component of that, and probably wouldn't work, almost certainly wouldn't work as well with maybe anyone else. But
right.
I mean, as far as the departure point from the comic, you know, it kind of does. We talked about this on the show. Stick to the broad outline of that plot. I would say
the origin in the movie is pretty. It's not too dissimilar from the comic origin.
Yeah, I mean, details are changed, of course.
Sure, it's modernized.
This happens, this happens, you know. But I think the big jump-off point there is that movie, Tony Stark has this thing happen to him and then does learn the lesson.
Sure, he has an awakening. You're 100% right.
Make the effort to change. He has sort of the Spider-Man moment, and it's sold so very well, of course, by Robert Downey Jr.
Absolutely.
Whereas comics Iron Man doesn't. Admittedly, you don't really get a lot of this in that debut issue, but after this happens to him, he pretty much goes on and keeps doing what he's been doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. It's an interesting thing that I think you guys should track, and that I want to track as well on this show, is just... Well, here's the thing about Marvel movies, is you look at Iron Man, created in 2008, the movie, not the character, obviously, and it was pretty much, if you guys know, not to get too deep into the history of Marvel, but obviously Marvel goes bankrupt in the 90s, bails itself out in part by selling the movie rights to its most successful characters, Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, to the point where when Marvel, and even Hulk, and when Marvel Studios wants to launch its own line of movies in 2008, they've got kind of the leftover
It's slim pickings, right?
Exactly. And that was, as someone who I started at Marvel in 2007, I was like, oh man, an Iron Man movie? Like, I don't know if that's going to work, but there was something there. Again, the guts are there. This character's endured. There has not been a year without an Iron Man ongoing series since he was created.
No.
He's never been canceled. There is some innate appeal to him, and I think, you know, that reflected in the movies, and the movies really made him work. But I do think, I don't know, in that initial run-up, I don't know. You know what? I'll take a stab at it and just say that I feel like Tony Stark, if Peter Parker was the relatable character who we could all see ourselves being, Tony Stark was kind of the guy we wished we were, in a way. Yeah, he was rich. Women loved him. You got to put aside the weapons manufacturing thing, because that's just such a product of the age. You know, it's the 60s. And I mean, that actually, honestly, in the 60s probably made him a more popular character.
Yeah.
Because, you know, America was, you know, we're in the Cold War and we want to arm ourselves and fight back against the Russians. So it did work on that level. But I do think that Iron Man is very different. Even then, yeah, his closest contemporary would probably be Thor. Well, his closest contemporary is someone we're going to discuss later. But in the sense that Thor was another adult hero, not necessarily relatable. His flaw, though, was that he was just, you know, he was Donald Blake. He was the lame Donald Blake. Iron Man, I just like, Iron Man, I think, was just so different. It was so different than the other Marvel characters.
Yeah, I almost want to make a really up my own ass statement of something
This is the place for him.
Yeah, right. He's not really. He's more of an aspirational character than an inspirational character.
Absolutely, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, no, it does.
In that, he is the guy you want to be, but you don't necessarily look to as a good person. And
sure,
maybe you're right in that Stan Lee was Larry Lieber, whoever you want to, divvy
credit
this
with
up
Iron
between.
Man, yeah.
Like they're trying to play in that sandbox a little bit and do an almost morally ambiguous type of. I mean, I called it the 60s version of the grim and gritty superhero comic on the Marvel Age #2. So maybe there's something that they're trying to reach for there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like you, I guess I don't really get it because he is this character with so much staying power, in that from the beginnings of my comics reading, I realized was kind of a big deal heavy hitter of the Marvel Universe, but not a character I was personally ever all that interested in. And I've never talked to anyone who comics Iron Man is their favorite superhero. No one. And
well, I can find you a whole generation of kids who would say it now.
Would say it now. Yeah. Exactly.
But no, it's interesting you say that, because Iron Man, for me, when I was growing up and reading comics, actually reading them in the 90s, Iron Man was not a favorite of mine by any means. But I do distinctly remember when I was a kid, like a little kid, before I was actually reading comics, but I was just aware of superheroes. Mm-hmm. The two superheroes I thought were the coolest were, and this maybe a red and yellow thing, but it was the Flash and Iron Man. They were my favorites. They were my favorites when I was 5 or 6, and there was just something about the appearance that I just thought Iron Man was super cool, and I thought, the technology angle was really neat, and I just thought, but before I didn't know who Tony Stark was, but I just knew
just visually it was.
Yeah, Iron Man's a visually appealing character, and I think there's something to that. But
no doubt,
I think we'll talk more about Iron Man as the years go on. I think he's kind of a cipher in those early stories. But someone has a lot more to him, and I kept alluding to him and not saying his name. But I would say, and I would argue, and you see this in your favorite movie, Infinity War, that his closest contemporary in the early years of the Marvel Universe was, you have to look at Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange. Again, a very interesting, flawed character. And I talked with Russell on the first episode about how Fantastic Four allowed Kirby the latitude to do what he really wanted to do, which was Thor. Thor was Kirby's baby. In that same sense, I think Steve Ditko took an ownership over Spider-Man, and we obviously see that as the years go on. He had a lot of opinions, and it would eventually lead to his leaving the book. But I think the success of Spider-Man led to Steve Ditko getting to do what he really wanted to do, and that was Doctor Strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would have to concur there. You see so much more of his fingerprints very early on those just real quick hits, kind of Strange Tales, backup stories, for want of something else to call them, with, you've got the very sort of jittery types of characters and the angular renderings and his designs all on full display, and it just seems so much more, we use the term atmospheric a lot, but I mean, they are. Those comics just speak to me as the product of Steve Ditko as sort of this.
He's a labor of love.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is what he wanted to be doing. And I would argue that as far as comics that stand the test of time, from the early days to current day, those early, I would take and you guys said it already, and I'm just echoing, but those early Strange Tales stories, those early Doctor Strange stories from '63, I would print them today. Mm-hmm. They're so incredibly imaginative. Just the language that Stan is using. Again, I think Doctor Strange is another favorite of Stan's. The language that Stan is using, but moreover, the visuals that Ditko is doing stands up against any modern art today. He was just so dynamic on this character. Just look at Doctor Strange. His costume design is so beyond just about anything from that period. There's so many intricate little details, from the eyes to the ways that the spots on his gloves, to the way his tunic hangs over, to his cape, to his cowl, to all this cool stuff. Mm-hmm. Visually, Doctor Strange is the most interesting character in the early Marvel universe, I would argue. I mean, Spider-Man has a certain undeniable quality to him, but I think Strange is where Ditko really let loose and opened up and got to play with it.
There is a timelessness to those stories that you don't get in others. And that, mm-hmm. yes, they can be plucked right out of their existence in 1963 and plopped into a contemporary modern landscape. I mean, certainly our technology in terms of the production of these things is a lot different, but it's not, you don't get all the Cold War bullshit and the Red Scare and all these, politics of
right. A lot of things that date the other stories are not present mm-hmm. in Doctor Strange because he's not in the real world. And it also sets him apart in many ways that I think Doctor Strange for years is not a character that really integrated with the rest of the Marvel Universe, because he's really off doing his old thing. And if you look at all the characters, you look at, Fantastic Four, Avengers, X-Men, Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, eventually Captain America, they all are kind of, interacting, standing side by side, and they're all, with the exception of Spider-Man. But you look at it, the Lee Kirby characters are all kind of in this shared universe. Mm-hmm. You guys talked about on Marvel Age how Spider-Man not being an Avenger was a big deal, which I want to get back to in a sec. But, I mean, you also look at the fact that Doctor Strange is very separate from the rest of the Marvel Universe. You don't see... I mean, he's in New York. They base him in New York. They put him in Greenwich Village, which was a master stroke again, because what a weird part of New York to put him in. But sure. But I think much like Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, by virtue of being a Stan and Steve character as opposed to a Stan and Jack character, yes, he would guest star in Fantastic Four. Yes, he would cross over. Yes, he would eventually be one of the Defenders. But I think Doctor Strange has always felt a little off. And I think that is because at the end of the day, he is Steve Ditko's character. And I think, Spider-Man eventually would be drawn by John Romita and all these other artists, but there's something very inherent about Ditko to Doctor Strange, and it really is like he exists on his own plane. And to your point, he's not fighting the Russians, he's not dealing with any of these, he's not dealing with any of these real world problems. He's off fighting the friggin' living embodiment of nightmares, and yes. Running up against other evil sorcerers and stuff like that. It's very different. And I think one of the things that makes it work is how different it is, but it's interesting that today, if you look at today's Avengers, Jason Aaron's Avengers, Doctor Strange is on the team. And I think it took a lot of work to get him to that point where he could be on the Avengers. And we can argue the merits or the disadvantages of Doctor Strange and the Avengers another time. But I just think there is something special about Strange and his stories, and it almost feels like you're reading as they were racing to make the Marvel Universe this cohesive vision where all these characters, Thor flew by Spider-Man in the pages of his comic, and they all were crossing over and interacting with each other, and that was the strength of the Marvel Universe. I think you had Strange siloed off doing his own thing.
it really is a testament to the strength of the character design, certainly Ditko's storytelling abilities, and Stan's choices as well, as far as how he kind of peppered his scripts with some rather original phraseology.
Absolutely, man.
That he's not just this cliche magician type stock character, you know? And that really just goes to show that this is how the character could connect with audiences back then, and does have the longevity that he has had, despite being, as you said, so distant from everything else that was going on around him.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It does beg the question of how does he interact with this larger universe, and they found ways to make that work.
And that's something you guys will see as you go in your journey when he pops up in other titles and you can talk about. But a last point on Doctor Strange before we move on is you kind of already started talking about it, though, is Strange, and he's a product of the 60s. He was very counterculture. He was very appealing to these kids who, let's come out and say it, like, kids on drugs love Doctor Strange. He was this weird, trippy superhero. He was psychedelic. He was doing this creepy, crazy stuff. You had Nightmare. You eventually had Dormammu and Eternity and all these great Ditko designs. But he was very much like, he certainly wasn't Captain America or Iron Man. And it's remarkable that, I think it's a testament to the strength of modern Marvel and Marvel Studios that Doctor Strange was a success as a movie character. And I think Benedict Cumberbatch does a great job with him. But he was such a rebellious character. And again, look at the origin they eventually tell. It's a great origin. I mean, much like we give a lot of credit to Spider-Man's origin. Fantastic Four's origin is really the least impressive part of the Fantastic Four. But Doctor Strange's origin is really good. Like,
and we don't get it until, really 4 stories down the line.
Yeah. But you do get it, and once you get it, it's like, wow, this was worth the wait. Like, that's the cool thing is you guys read those initial Doctor Strange stories, and it's like, all right, he's kind of cool as just this omniscient, like, very powerful magician who's doing his thing. But once you get to know Stephen Strange's story, that he was this arrogant doctor, he was just, and it kind of flips the script on you. It's kind of a surprise because in his initial stories, he's portrayed, as the good guy. But as Stephen Strange, he was very much not a good guy. The same as Tony Stark, we argued, wasn't the greatest guy. But Strange has that humbling moment a la Spider-Man, where, he loses the use of his hands. He can't be a doctor anymore. He has to go on this redemptive quest, and he eventually becomes a good man because inherently he was a good man. He was a doctor, but he was so lost in his own ego. But to have it all stripped away and kind of have him turn into this mystic success, I think is just it's one of my favorite origins in all of Marvel.
Yes. How does that quote go? Stretching the imagination far into the phantasmagoria of other dimensions and bending time and space and the cosmos, all that. Yeah, I mean, that, again, this is the audience that is really vibing on Doctor Strange.
It was a very specific target audience. Yeah. Doctor Strange.
And I guess we're a part of it because we had high praise for those stories.
Yeah. Well, I think no, it's better left alone.
Okay.
No, I think Strange's stories have aged very well. Like I said, I think they have a quality to them that stands out with modern readers, and certainly there will be more to talk about Doctor Strange. All right, I want to quick hit a couple of characters before we kind of wrap up into our crescendo, talking about a really big concept. And I don't want to spend too much time on Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos because you guys talked about it enough, and really I think it's just it's not hard to understand. Jack Kirby was a veteran. I think he wanted to do a war comic. He had done war comics before, and I think he wanted to do another one. Stan also, though he had an interesting military career, was also in the military. I think they were both they're both guys who value, military service and wanted to do a war comic. And it's some people love Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos. You guys did not have particularly high praise for it. I think I fall in the middle where I just don't really care about it. I'm not a big war comics guy.
I'm just kind of indifferent. Same deal. It's, and my only question for you would have been, were we missing something here?
I don't think you were. I don't think you guys were missing anything. What do you mean when you ask were you missing something?
Just, was there some kind of appeal or something really revolutionary here, or was it different from other comics of its ilk? I would argue that
Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, as far as the burgeoning Marvel Universe, is the least innovative book that they do. Because if you look at something like Sergeant Rock over from DC, it's literally the same characters. It's the same stock characters. I'm not going to deny the fact that Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan eventually would become great characters in other roles. Much like the Hulk didn't work in his initial role, and they found a way to make him work. I think Nick Fury, once he became a super spy, and Dum Dum Dugan, once he became his second in command as with S.H.I.E.L.D., which we'll get to, that really launched them. But I think with Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, it was I don't want to say it was a vanity project for Stan and Jack, but in some senses it was. I think there was a certain popularity. War comics were popular, and again, we have to understand here, like when we talked about Tony Stark, this was a different society where, it was a very rah-rah pro-America readership. So, if you do a comics, there was a fascination about World War II, I think in 1963, people were they were almost intrigued and fascinated by this event that had taken place just before they were of age, and it was this kind of mystical thing. But I don't think Stan and Jack broke any barriers, with the exception of making Gabe Jones a featured character. Yes. That was the one significant to me. That's, other than introducing Nick Fury, that's the biggest significant contribution of this comic, was that they did stack Gabe Jones right up against the other characters and make him, an important character. But for the most part, I don't think they're doing anything innovative with Sergeant Fury. Some people liked it because it was good. I think Kirby's art was good. Again, I don't think it's his best stuff, because I think Kirby at his best is imagining these crazy alien worlds and other dimensions and, big cosmic stuff. I don't think him, telling a war story is necessarily as interesting to me. But again, different strokes for different folks. I think that's enough said about Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So I do want to talk briefly about Avengers. I don't want to talk about Avengers for that long, strangely enough.
I kind of don't either. It's only one issue we looked at, but I'm sort of with you. I know what you mean.
I mean, look, Avengers was... Fantastic Four was supposed to be Marvel's Justice League. Avengers was Marvel's Justice League. Mm-hmm. And it was all of their big hit characters. I think the things that are most interesting about Avengers, like you guys touched on, it was a showcase for Thor and Loki. And I think when they leaned into the Thor stuff, it really worked. I think Avengers was the book where Hulk found his footing. Iron Man, cool in a team setting. I don't know. Again, I don't have a lot to say about Iron Man. Ant-Man and the Wasp, who you guys just do not like.
Are we wrong though? I mean, it's just...
I said it with Russell last time. I think Hank Pym never worked as a comics character, and I think Michael Douglas is the best Hank Pym we've ever gotten.
That's the thing. I don't really hate Hank Pym. I do agree he's pretty boring. There's not a lot to the guy, but just as a supporting character,
he's just there.
Gotten decent stuff out of him.
Yeah, I would argue there's much more to the Wasp.
Oh yeah.
But not necessarily in these early appearances. I think it would take many years for writers to find what was special about the Wasp. I think she appealed as one of those early characters because she was different, because she was, she was a female character. But of course, I mean, female characters, as we know, they didn't fare well in 1960s Marvel, which
No,
I mean,
not.
but the best thing I can say about the Wasp, same as Sue Storm and eventually Jean Grey, who we'll talk about, is that there was something there that later writers found. So obviously in their creation, there's something to them. I think, it's not necessarily a fully realized, fully happening character, but there was something to the idea of these characters. There's something in the bones that would later be utilized. But again, that's a discussion for another day. I think that with Avengers, it was a no-brainer because put all these successful characters in one book, and obviously they're going to do well. In all the ways that Fantastic Four was a risk, Avengers was a safe bet.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense. And, I'm forgetting the exact story that Tom Brevoort told me, but there was something about... I'll research this and I'll talk more about it next episode. There was something about, I think it was supposed to be Daredevil was supposed to come out instead of Avengers, but Daredevil wasn't ready yet.
Oh.
So Avengers got kind of pulled together, I want to say.
I have heard that there were some big production problems on Daredevil.
Yeah,
which
you guys are going to
talk about next time.
Yeah, you guys are going to get Daredevil in your next episode, but I do think there was something that I might even shoot an email to Tom to get the accurate story about this. But if you guys don't know who Tom Brevoort is, then we need to have a talk.
No, that's going to be a problem.
That's going to be a problem. That's going to be a
anyone
problem.
Doesn't know that.
What?
Yes.
That's
I don't think anyone will have that problem.
Yeah. But
don't worry.
There was something going on with Daredevil and Avengers that I think Avengers may have been produced kind of on the fly, so to say. I think it was the type of thing where like Daredevil wasn't ready to go, so what do we do? Well, let's do a book with all our biggest characters, and then obviously we're going to keep publishing this because it's a success. Yeah, but you guys alluded to it. I will allude to it here. There's something that happens to the Avengers in 1964 that makes the book click, and
oh yeah. In a big way.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen in 1963. So we'll move on. And so we come to the X-Men, who I know, Tim, you're a huge X-Men fan. That was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this particular episode of Masterclass. The X-Men I just talked about how the Avengers was a safe bet. X-Men was not. It was an outside-the-box concept. It was the idea of, it's very different from what they'd done. In some ways, it was a safe bet because, as you guys discussed, they basically transplanted the Fantastic Four's personalities and put them into these new characters. But so much of the X-Men, and I'm an X-Men guy too. X-Men was my first comic. It was the one I got into when I was a kid. It's the one I loved in the 90s. It's the one that it was always my favorite. And there's so much from that first issue that's just, again, it's impressive. I'm going to heap more praise on Lee and Kirby here. The fact that they had already done so much in creating the Marvel Universe. By the time they come to X-Men, it's really their third-tier team book behind FF and Avengers. It's a really like almost a leftover scraps thing, but they create a whole new race, which is you guys tabbed it. It's brilliant. The idea that you no longer need to come up with origin stories for characters with powers is just the ultimate cheat. And it's so great.
It's a shortcut, but it opens up this world of possibilities.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, whether by design or kind of stumbling into that by accident, it's just so amazing to me. So uncanny to me, I should say.
So uncanny. But yeah, I mean, X-Men, and then the other stuff you do with it, the fact that it's teen heroes again. It's a team of teen heroes that are so unlike, say, the Teen Titans. And again, it's a whole team that's different. But I would argue, the most interesting characters to me, I don't know how much you guys touched on this. The most interesting characters to me in X-Men #1 are Professor X and Magneto. I am just fascinated by Professor X, this weirdo. He's bald, he's in a wheelchair, he's got telepathic powers, and he's the headmaster of a school. Could not be more different from the rest of the Marvel Universe if you tried. So much older than the other characters, and just very interesting. But then Magneto, just from the minute he's introduced, I think is just such an interesting character. They really, obviously, for years would not hit their stride with Magneto as far as making him, kind of this figure of, this sympathetic figure in terms of X-Men becoming this metaphor for racial discrimination and, Magneto almost being the Malcolm X of the whole movement. But there was something about him in that first issue that I just was like, well, this is a good character. And I was like you, I think you told this story, Tim, where you picked up X-Men #1 on the newsstands in the 90s.
Yes, as a reprint. Yeah,
I did the same thing. And
oh man,
yeah, I did the exact same thing. And did it have the silver border around it?
Yes,
right.
Yes,
so it had the silver border, and that's what marked it as being a reprint. But I felt for the same thing. I was like, oh, cool, X-Men #1, which I thought was fascinating. And of course, I was watching the X-Men cartoon, so I was like, who are these guys? It's very different. But yeah, I bought it the same way, and I was just, I don't know, I was hooked. Much like Doctor Strange had his own little world, it felt a little bit like the X-Men were in their own little world.
Oh yeah, I mean, they're such freaky characters.
Yeah.
In terms of their designs, it's sort of, it's kind of tame looking at this through 2018 eyes, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of a 1963 reader, and it's like, okay, you've got this guy with wings. It's that physical mutation where it is, on the one hand, very cool, but kind of creepy at the same time. I mean, he's got this harness that he uses to kind of cramp them down into his suit coat to conceal. It's just,
it was body horror, man. It was. I mean, it's that thing where if you're, again, getting back to what you were talking about with Tony Stark with inspirational and aspirational, sure, it was cool that Angel had wings, but when you really got down and thought about it, and Lee and Kirby did a good job with this. I think, you look over at DC and Hawkman, it was just, oh, he has wings, it's cool. Lee and Kirby got into the fact that, no, this would be a huge pain in the ass. Having wings is not pleasant. It's just not, it's not necessarily the fun thing. And, they get into other things, the Beast is obviously, I want to let you talk about, the Beast is obviously, got the misshapen feet and hands. Cyclops can't take his glasses off.
Yeah, you can't see this guy's face at all.
Yeah, these are freak. You nailed it when you said these are freaky characters.
Iceman kind of has the, you can almost call it passing privilege of this group. I mean, Marvel Girl as well. Yeah,
they're the normal looking ones.
Right, but when he ices up, it's kind of a different story, especially that early design where it's
the
snowman.
Yeah.
Fun fact, I will share this from that. It may not be that fun, but anyway, from that first issue, that reprint of X-Men retroactively Uncanny X-Men #1.
Yep.
That is where I learned how Cyclops' visor actually worked.
Right.
So, I was a kid at the time reading then contemporary X-Men comics, familiar with these characters to an extent, had a lot of love for Cyclops, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, by the 90s, they were all back on the team. So, we didn't grow up necessarily in, the 70s and 80s when they were off doing their own thing. But, yeah, they were all back on the X-Men by the time we were kids.
Come to think of it, you and I, we may have bought two different versions of an X-Men #1 in the same year.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, definitely.
In a sense. But in any case, I mean, I knew, okay, his power is generated from his eyes. It can only be contained by ruby quartz. And so what's the deal with the visor? Why does he sometimes have a visor versus the sunglasses?
Glasses, yeah.
I had no idea that he actually manually opened the visor
Right.
until reading this. I mean, I'm all of, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's just the type of thing that Stan Lee loved, that kind of gimmickry.
Yeah.
And the expository demonstrations of powers, which I think there's a pretty good sequence of that in this first issue. It maybe goes on a little long, but still, you've got 5 characters to introduce.
Yep.
Give it some breathing room.
Yep.
And I mean, but by the time you got into really even the late 80s, early 90s, you didn't see that kind of thing unless you're really plunging into like official Marvel handbooks and all that stuff. It's not like you even see like Cyclops manipulate his visor, for example.
Right. No, it's a cool little detail, and I think X-Men #1 is full of cool little details. Like you said, like when Angel puts his harness on, like just little things that made these characters unique, and that, I think there was a lot to it. The other thing I want to hit on is the fact that I think there's this misconception with X-Men that the discrimination metaphor didn't come into existence until the Claremont years, which isn't true. It's there in the early years. I don't know that it's necessarily there in that first issue. I don't think it was baked in. And again, this will be another thing to track as we go through the years to see where it really takes hold. Because let's be honest, that's when X-Men starts standing apart as a concept. When you realize that mutants are a stand-in for minorities, and it just has this whole deeper level that is really insane. I mean, the first issue is just cool powers, cool costumes, cool villain. And there's some neat stuff in it, but I mean, it's later that these guys really get some legs.
I mean, I do think you get it as early as the Sentinels, which I'm not going to get into. I know that's a future, but
I think that's when we first see it. Not long after. So I do think, not that we don't credit Lee and Kirby with enough, but I think this might be another case where I'm very excited to get to kind of not the early X-Men and not the like Claremont X-Men that we'll get to in the 70s, but these mid to late 60s X-Men, when like Roy Thomas is writing the book and Neil Adams is drawing it. I think there's a lot there that people overlook and don't realize like how cool it is. And I think X-Men, that's probably the most underrated period of X-Men. I mean,
it's the foundation for their greatest hits, really.
Exactly. And like anything, Lee and Kirby create a lot of characters really quick that are enduring and last for a long time. But yeah, I think with the X-Men, the most interesting stuff is yet to come.
Can I get into something with you a little bit?
Sure.
On the topic of X-Men.
Yeah.
And we don't have to do a whole big thing, but we did have a mini debate on Marvel Age. The whole Iceman thing, right?
Yep.
The question of, was it the intent from the beginning? He was always written as gay. Russell kind of said yes. Me, I'm made a little bit uneasy just by the question itself, because it's sort of, on the one hand, it's like, who cares? It's sort of like, it invites the argument of, well, if that wasn't the intent, then this is a terrible thing to do, and never should have happened. Which, I mean, potentially you could conclusively answer that question. And my position has always been, who cares? It's not relevant.
Right.
So, I mean, I personally am not even that really interested in going there, but for the record, if you had to ask me, no, I don't think he was being written that way with some kind of intent by Stan. But again, I don't think it's something that ought to be dwelled on.
Sure, and we're not going to dwell on it, but I do think you're right. It was an interesting discussion in that episode of Marvel Age, and it's definitely something that bears commenting on. I will put these things out there. Number one, Iceman is my favorite X-Man of all time. He always has been.
Okay.
I don't know why. There's something about him that I always just thought he was the best. And when I was at Marvel, when it was revealed that, Iceman is gay, Iceman is a homosexual, I thought it was great. I thought it was a whole nother layer to the character. Really, the way Bendis and subsequent writers went about it, it didn't feel tacked on. It made sense, I think the way it was handled was, it doesn't feel like this is gratuitous. We're doing this just for the sake of doing it. You look at the character's history, his relationships, and it all kind of adds up. He was always a guy who tried a little too hard to be normal. And suddenly, I think the Iceman ongoing series that's no longer being published, unfortunately, was wonderful and was a great showcase for Bobby Drake and really, really gave him more dimension than he's had in years. So I think it's a great development. I think it's a neat aspect of the character. It doesn't need to define the character, but it definitely, I think it's a welcome change. That being said, I do not even 1% think that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby intended for Bobby Drake to be a gay character. I think you got to remember that Stan and Jack, and you guys talked about it a lot, so I'm not going to get into it a lot, but these were older guys writing teenagers, and their handle on the attitude of a 16-year-old was not the most accurate. I think they wrote Peter Parker, and to a larger extent Johnny Storm, as being interested in girls, but I think they always intended Bobby Drake, Iceman, to be more immature. Even if he was the same age as Johnny Storm, he wasn't as worldly. Like he was the closest thing in the Marvel universe to a kid until Power Pack came along. Because they weren't writing like child characters. They weren't writing 9 and 10-year-olds, but I think they saw Iceman as being the closest thing. And it's ironic that his name was from the start Iceman. But we won't get into that. Sure. But I do think, his not being interested in Jean was just a product of this is what Stan thinks a 16-year-old acts like. And in particular, Stan wanted to show with Iceman, I think he already had in Johnny Storm the girl crazy teenager, and he already had in Peter Parker the kind of nerdy teenager. I think in terms of exploring the archetypes of the young teenager, the one he hadn't really done was the super immature one. And that's where he went with Bobby Drake, with the jokes and with everything. I think that was just the way he wrote Bobby Drake. And I just don't think he was interested in girls in the same way that a 10-year-old's not necessarily interested in girls. And I think the fact that they made him 16 was just, them not really, they didn't want to make a character that young because they didn't think their audience would appreciate them. So I think it was just a compromise they made. That's my take on the whole thing.
And this is just his first appearance, and he's being written very broadly. He's kind of the fifth stringer in a team of 5 right here. So it just sort of, I don't think there was a whole lot of deliberate, I don't want to say thought behind this writing or characterization at the time, but he's just not really developed yet.
I don't think there was as much nuance given as people are retroactively assigning to it because he happens to be a gay character in 2018.
Yeah, and to your point, granted, yes, it works, absolutely. You can connect the dots totally, and it's a very logical conclusion that you arrive at. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, Iceman, not my favorite character, but one he's always kind of been a favorite, especially in terms of the X-Men. And I mean, obviously I like him a lot more now these days. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. It was something that potentially is the 800-pound gorilla.
Right. I'll say this, and I'll kind of close the book on it. When I say that the characterization of Iceman that they've used to justify is the wrong word, but when they've used to explain, like, okay, yeah, he's clearly, he's gay, and some of the past characterization is like, oh, that makes sense. I wasn't looking at like his 1963 first appearance as being like, oh, because he didn't hit on Jean Grey in the first issue of X-Men, it now makes sense decades later that he's gay. No, I'm talking more about like the way he was written in, the 2000s and beyond, or even the 80s and 90s. There's a classic, weird as hell, J.M. DeMatteis Iceman miniseries.
Oh my god!
Yes. It's one of the most bizarre things in the world. I, of course, have read it because I love Iceman. But I would argue that miniseries does more to solidify that, yes, this is a character who potentially would be gay, and it would make sense, than the classic X-Men stuff, or even his Defenders appearances and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't think X-Men #1. I don't think Stan and Jack had any intention to that degree. And that kind of brings us full circle on our discussion of 1963. Tim, what'd you think?
What a whirlwind! Yeah, right.
A lot to talk about.
Here's the thing with 1963 Marvel. The way that I look at it, to the extent that I look at the year as a distinct whole, when I would turn over the back of a trading card in the early 90s, when I'm first getting into comics, getting into Marvel, and they would have these little facts and did-you-knows about the characters, you'd see first appearance. And for whatever reason, it seemed like
everyone was 1963.
It was 1963 over and over. Yeah. And even collecting the comics, you would see like 30 years of whatever. The
1993 was a big anniversary year for Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, X-Men and Avengers both had their 30th anniversaries, which I guess we'll get to that eventually. That's a somewhat unique event that they did to commemorate that.
I mean, it's cool that X-Men and Avengers came out at the same time, because they would for years be intermingled all the way up to AVX, a few years ago. But it was always the Avengers and the X-Men running side by side. But yeah, continue.
Right. So, I mean, and I don't know why 1963 stands out in that way, because, I mean, you got the first half of that in the episode that we debuted with, where you had Spider-Man and Thor and the FF. Yeah. And I guess Ant-Man to some degree. In that kind of 61, 62 time frame. But I don't know. It just seems like 63 was like where the two halves of Marvel really met. Right. And we do have one more debut and one re-debut coming. And then that's kind of what we're going to run with for a while.
Yeah, those are the fundamentals of the Marvel Universe. Yeah, I mean, just to put a capper on it, I think 63 was a hugely important year. I think 61 and 62 were Stan, Jack, and Steve finding their footing to some extent, getting their credibility in line, and then 63 was the year they could really be off to the races and start creating. And obviously, X-Men, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, all these things that would become hugely important in the years to come, not to mention all the innovative stuff they were doing in Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. We didn't even talk about the Fantastic Four annual, which was brilliant. Sure. But, just so much big stuff going on in 1963. And I think it's going to be, like you said, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of roll into 64, 65, where it's not like you said, there's a big re-debut coming and a few big debuts, but it's not going to be as much an explosion of characters so much as it's, okay, we have this world, now what do we do with it? And I think that's going to be the interesting stuff to come.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah. So anyways, Tim, thank you for joining me on this edition of Marvel Age Masterclass. Where can people find you online, and what should they be looking out for from you?
Okay, well, in addition to the Marvel Age podcast, which is basically monthly, actually a little bit more regular than we had anticipated so far in these early outings, but you can find that on Place to Be Nation. I think you do that better than me. But
I'm finding my way. I was listening to as I told you, I've been listening to the Hard Driving Fanboys Happy Awards, and I think I heard it done so many just in my head. So
yeah, probably a lot of variations on it.
Exactly.
You can also find myself and the wonderful Jennifer Smith on Talkin' Pop, our monthly sort of maybe talk show podcast, if you can call it that, where we invite a guest on to talk about interesting aspects of their lives and contemporary issues in pop culture. So look for that. We'll have our June episode coming. I mean, we have to record it first.
Yeah.
But we do have a game plan that will be coming.
Yeah, don't overpromise.
No, absolutely not. I've learned that lesson.
Yeah.
But middle of the month-ish, we'll say.
Cool.
And then on Place to Be Nation Wrestling, I do have a monthly wrestling gig.
Yep.
WCW Survey Says with myself and Andy Helene.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of what it sounds like, a WCW retrospective looking at the great events, concepts, performers, happenings from World Championship Wrestling from over the years.
Very cool, man.
Very fun stuff.
This is pretty much the exclusive place to find me podcast-wise. But you can reach out to me on social media. I'm on Twitter as Ben J. Morse. I believe you are on Twitter as Psych68.
That is correct.
There you go. So CYKE68. I'm also on Instagram, Ben Morse 882. And I'm participating in the Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook page, which has become a really fun place to hang out. But yeah, that's a lot. You know, we went a little over on this podcast. I think that's going to be my challenge as we go. I think we're running about an hour and a half, which is still, doable. That's reasonable to ask people to listen to an hour and a half. But I can see my wife standing at the door waiting for me to come in. So we're going to wrap this up. I want to say thanks to Tim Capel for joining me. Tim is, of course, a member of the flagship Marvel Age podcast. Follow him there as well as all the other places he said. But until next time, guys, let us know what you thought of the show. Please send feedback and keep enjoying all these great Marvel comics that we are talking about through the magic of Marvel Unlimited, which I can't say enough good things about, and all the other ways you can get your comics. So, until next time, class dismissed.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We offer them to you on two great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, along with Main Event, Survey Says, the Monday Night Wars, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction show, as well as Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network podcasts and pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Match of the Week podcast, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Through the Years, Worldcast, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Center Stage, and Letters from Kayfabe, plus much more. And on our very popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, NBA Team, PTBN Play, Sunday Groove, Breaking Balls, and Lucha Undead,
as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans
with the hard-traveling fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversations, Geek and Sassy, and Marvel Age Podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback today. All these shows, plus others, available at PlayStation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects, and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlayStation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, and thehistoryofwrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlayStation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.